Have you ever wondered how something apparently simple can hide such profound complexity that, when misunderstood, it can turn success into ruin? Imagine yourself in the shoes of a young man, confident and with a promising future, receiving 4 pieces of advice from his father on his deathbed. He believed that this advice held the secret to his happiness, prosperity, and achievement. Now imagine that, by following these guidelines, your life falls apart. It seems like a paradox, doesn't it? However, the protagonist of our story today experienced exactly that. A young man, heir to a fortune and ancestral wisdom, who, through lack of reflection, saw everything lost: his wealth, his health, and even the relationships that gave meaning to his life. This story begins in a small town, where an old merchant, known not only for his wealth, but also for his wisdom, caught everyone's attention. He had built an empire from scratch and lived a full and satisfied life. Towards the end, he realized that his greatest wealth was not the coins he accumulated, but the lessons he could impart to his son. And so, in his last moments, he called the young man to his side and revealed the secret of his successful life. 4 simple pieces of advice. He believed that these words would not only uphold his son's legacy, but also propel him to unprecedented heights. However, we understand that the interpretation of words can either build or destroy. The young man, eager to follow in his father's footsteps, listened carefully to each word, but missed something essential: the true meaning behind them. That was the beginning of his journey to the lowest point. Before we continue, it's important to note that most of you who are watching have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you are enjoying this content and want to see more stories and reflections like this, subscribe now and leave your like. This simple gesture makes all the difference so that we can continue to bring content that inspires and helps transform lives. We count on you to grow even further and bring these messages to more people. Have you ever stopped to think about how much interpreting advice can impact your life? Stories like the one we are going to tell are more common than we imagine. They show that wisdom is in how we understand and apply words. The young man in our story, full of hope and confidence, received 4 simple pieces of advice from his father before he passed away. The father, a respected and successful merchant, believed that these guidelines would be the key to his son not only preserving his fortune, but also achieving true happiness. He didn't anticipate that misinterpretation of these words would set off a disastrous chain of events. This advice was curiously cryptic. Go out and come back in the shade, surround your house with leather, always sweeten your food, and keep your wife tied up. At first glance, these are phrases that could sound meaningless or even absurd. However, each phrase held a profound and symbolic significance, reflecting the father's lifelong accumulation of wisdom. The problem? The young man was unable to see beyond the literal. This raises an essential question. Why do we have so much difficulty interpreting symbolic advice or teachings? According to studies on communication and psychology, such as those published in 2010 by the American Psychological Association, our brain tends to look for the quickest and most direct way to understand something, often ignoring nuances or contexts. This is what we call literality bias, a tendency to interpret information literally without reflecting deeply on its true meaning. In practice, this bias was disastrous for the young man. He felt he was paying tribute to his father's memory by adhering strictly to the advice. To fulfill the first piece of advice, he built a tent that connected his home to his workplace, ensuring he was always in the shade when he left or returned. In the second, he surrounded the house with leather, thinking it would provide protection. For the third, he started eating only sweets, believing that this would bring him pleasure and satisfaction. And the fourth? Well, he literally tied his wife up, thinking it was a way to keep her close. But, as expected, these actions brought devastating consequences. His business began to fail, neighbors stayed away because of the smell of leather, his health deteriorated, and his wife left him. All of this happened because he failed to interpret the symbolism of the advice and apply it with discernment. This story is not just about an individual mistake, but about something bigger: the importance of wisdom and reflection. Since ancient times, philosophers such as Socrates and Confucius have emphasized the need to question, interpret, and understand before acting. After all, the true power of advice lies in how we adapt it to our reality. So, before following any guidance, ask yourself, do I really understand what this means? As we will see later, the young man in our story had the chance to rediscover the meaning of his father's advice and transform his life. But this learning journey only began when he decided to seek help and understand what he had missed. Human relationships are the foundation of our lives. It is through them that we build our identity, find support, and face the challenges that arise along the way. However, neglecting to cultivate them carefully and ethically can lead to conflicts, frustrations, and even ruptures. In the story of the young merchant, one of the most intriguing pieces of advice he received from his father was, "Keep your wife tied up." To him, the sentence seemed clear. He decided to physically tie his wife with a rope, believing this would guarantee her presence and fidelity, in an attempt to literally fulfill his instructions. This interpretation, however, revealed a limited and insensitive view of human relationships, transforming a bond that should be one of love and trust into something oppressive and destructive. This disastrous action is a clear example of how a lack of understanding can ruin even the most important relationships. Instead of interpreting the advice as an invitation to strengthen ties with patience, dialogue, and respect, the young man opted for a literal path, which disregarded his partner's feelings and dignity. As a result, he ended up alone, without the emotional support that the relationship could have provided him. We're reaching the halfway point of our story, and if you're enjoying this reflection, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This aids us in delivering more transformative content in the future. And there's more! In the video description, you will find the link to my ebook Divine Essence, Rediscovering the Inner Self and Spiritual Peace. Trust, communication, and mutual understanding form the foundation of healthy relationships. Modern research, such as that carried out by the Gottman Institute, one of the most respected in the study of relationships, shows that couples who are able to resolve conflicts with empathy and respect have up to 80% more chance of maintaining a lasting and happy relationship. These numbers reinforce the importance of treating human bonds as a priority, investing time and energy to understand the other person's needs and feelings. But how does this connect to ethics? Relationships cannot prosper without an ethical commitment to act with integrity, honesty, and consideration for others. This context defines ethics as actively treating people as individuals with rights and feelings, not just as right or wrong. In the case of the young merchant, his ethical failure was not just the action of tying up his wife, but the lack of reflection on how his choices could impact her. The story also takes us to an essential point. Human relationships are reflections of our priorities and values. By neglecting the deep meaning of his father's advice, the young man showed how superficiality can erode the foundations of a true bond. Instead, when we respect others and value our relationships, we create a reciprocal environment that strengthens bonds. Just as the young man had to learn the hard way, each of us is responsible for nurturing the relationships around us with ethical and empathetic attitudes. And this is not just limited to marriages or family relationships. It also applies to friendships, work partnerships, and everyday interactions. When we build a solid foundation based on understanding, mutual respect, and ethics, we create not only stronger bonds but also a space where everyone can thrive. The lesson is clear. Keeping someone tied does not mean restricting, but rather strengthening bonds through trust, care, and genuine love. After all, solid relationships are not about control, but about the freedom to choose to be with those who respect and value us. Transformation is a powerful process and is often born from our most painful mistakes. Recognizing that he had misinterpreted his father's advice marked a turning point in the young merchant's journey. He saw his fortune disappear, his health deteriorate, and, even worse, he lost the respect and love of those around him. It was a moment of absolute ruin, but also of opportunity. Redemption began when he decided to seek help. Desperate and without answers, he found a wise man who, with patience and wisdom, helped him see the true meaning of the advice he had received. This moment was not just a learning experience. It was the beginning of a journey of self-discovery and reconstruction. The young man came to understand that the mistakes that led him to his lowest point were not the end of his story, but rather the start of a fresh opportunity to reshape his destiny. Transformation, in this context, requires the courage to confront our failures and the humility to learn from them. For the young man, this meant reevaluating his choices and recognizing that his actions, even when done with noble intentions, were based on misinterpretations. This realization led him to understand that wisdom is not just listening or following directions, but understanding the context and applying them with discernment. The process of redemption also requires action. Knowing where you went wrong is just the first step. The real challenge is in correcting course. Inspired by the wise man's explanations, the young man began to apply the advice in a symbolic and practical way. He began to work hard, valuing effort as a form of growth. Protect your home and your fortune not with physical barriers, but with smart strategies and planning. He changed his eating habits, balancing health and pleasure, and above all, he began to value the relationships in his life, rebuilding trust with his wife and those around him. This journey of transformation is an example of what many psychologists call post-traumatic growth, the concept of finding strength and purpose after severe adversity. Studies carried out by the University of North Carolina in 2015 show that people facing deep crises often emerge more resilient and focused, redefining their priorities and goals. But redemption is not instantaneous. For the young merchant, it took time, persistence, and continuous effort to rebuild not only his material life, but also his own identity. He learned that true wealth is not just in what we possess, but in the way we conduct our actions and relationships. At the end of this journey, the young man not only recovered what he had lost, but also became a wiser and more aware person. His business flourished again, his health improved, and he rebuilt bonds with those he had hurt. His transformation showed that, even in the face of the biggest mistakes, there is always the possibility of starting over, as long as we are willing to learn, change, and act with purpose. This story teaches us that the path to redemption is open to everyone. No matter how far we have gone in the wrong direction, there is always time to correct course. And often, it is in moments of greatest pain and failure that we find the seeds of our true growth. The story of the young merchant leaves us with a profound reflection. Life is a constant process of interpretation and learning. The challenges we face are not only tests of our ability, but also opportunities to see beyond the obvious, to understand what really matters, and to grow with our choices. His father's advice was not just practical guidance, but lessons rooted in wisdom and symbolism. They show us that life requires more than following instructions. It requires discernment, reflection, and an open vision to adapt what we learn to our circumstances. It's not the advice itself that determines the outcome, but how we apply it to our journey. This story is a powerful reminder that mistakes are part of the journey. The young merchant lost everything, but found redemption when he realized that every mistake contained a valuable lesson. Just like him, we all have the chance to transform difficulties into learning and to rebuild our lives with more clarity and purpose. Before we close, think for a moment. How many times have you made a decision without really thinking about its implications? How much advice have you followed without understanding the real meaning behind it? Perhaps the most important lesson here is to slow down, observe carefully, and act wisely. After all, success is not just about reaching the destination, but about how we choose the path. So today, take this message with you. Every piece of advice, every experience, and every challenge is an opportunity to grow and evolve. It's up to us to choose whether we want to interpret them in depth or pass by them without realizing the true value they carry. And now I ask, what would you do differently if you knew that your every choice is empowered to transform not only your life, but also the lives of those around you? Think about it. The next step is in your hands. If this video brought value to you, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Share your opinions or questions in the comments. We love to hear from you. Send this message to someone who may need to reflect on these teachings today, and activate the bell so you don't miss the next content. And speaking of which, don't stop here. Click on the next video to continue this journey of self-discovery and wisdom. I hope to see you there.